Welcome. The Western Maryland Railway had a train order office at Laurel Bank, West Virginia. Carolina Craftsman Kits has come out with a kit of this train order station. I have friends who both have layouts modeling this area of West Virginia, and I'll be showing you how I built these kits to fit on their layouts. First, we start with the kits. Carolina Craftsman Kits makes an excellent kit of this station. But the station was built in two parts with an addition on the back, which leaves a definite notch in the roofline. I wanted to reproduce this notch, so I cut it into the top of the sidewalls of both kits. I then started to lay out my strip wood for the bracing. I made the bracing long enough to extend below the floor for the skirting that would go around it. Then I used an X-Acto to lift some of the boards for weathering. I then added a heavy coating of Hunterline stain. I put a second coat down near the bottom where it would be dirtier. This was the base for my dry brushing of the gray paint on top of it. I wanted to get the worn wood effect that the photos have. I then used my wire brush tool to introduce some wood grain into it. I then applied over that some more stain. I started with Vetero murky brown near the bottom again. Then I used green near the bottom to represent mold and algae. And over all this, I used a Hunterline greige to blend it all together. As it dried, I liked the way it came out. Next, I started to work on my windows and doors. I first gave them a coating of primer. And then I came back and mixed up my red paint that I was going to brush on. I first did my door frames and then had to work on the window frames and the doors themselves. Then I used a sponge to go over all of them with the gray paint to give them a peeling paint effect. I test fitted them in to see how they looked, and I was happy with how it was coming out. I next put the glass into the window frames before I started gluing the walls together. My bracing made for very quick assembly of the four walls. Next, I primed and then applied red paint to the corner posts. I then used my wire brush and a sanding stick to get the peeling paint effect on them as well. Then I used the slicer to cut out my skirts around the bottom of the building, and my Ultimation sander to give myself a 45-degree angle. I test fit the skirt boards in place. Once I had them all fitting, I went ahead and mixed up Thai brown and creosote stain and applied that to them. Then went over them with some green again for algae and mold. Then I glued the skirt boards in place. After that, I started to glue my corner posts in place. Next, I glued all my windows and doors in. I then had to trim the top of my corner posts to be flush. I went ahead and glued a wall in between the two sections, even though it would be hard to see. Then I had to do everything again to the second kit. Next, it was time to work on the roofs. I was going to have tar paper strips on them. One of my methods is to spray them with the gray and then go back over it lightly with the black. I then cut all the pieces into strips roughly 3 foot, and then I use some 220 grit sandpaper to sand the edges, going through the black and into the gray. It also roughs up the edge and gives a nice worn tar paper look. Then, in addition to cutting off the ends, I glued in little blocks that would center my roof when I went to put it on the building. I painted the underside a gray that matched the building, and I painted my inside wall a darker gray. Then I glued on the roof using the blocks to position it and using weights to bend it down and fit in the notch. Next, I primed the fascia board that was going to go around the roof before applying red to it using a sponge. And then I put a little bit of stain on top of it for a weathered look. In order to apply the fascia, I was going to have to match the angle of the roof. So I used my angle gauge, and then I used my sander to sand the end of the boards so that they would match. I then applied the fascia boards onto both sides of the roof, and then onto the front and back of it. I wanted to have a dirty window look, so I made a very thin mixture of raw sienna and then applied it to the outside of the windows. At this point, it was about time to start adding details. First, I started adding the rafter tails underneath the roof. Then I started working on the stairs. I was able to make one long stair tread that I could then cut into short pieces to go on both kits. And they both needed to have a platform coming out one side. Based on discussions with the customers, I made one large and one smaller. These were just put together with strip wood, and then after they were done, I stained them heavily with Thai brown from Hunterline. This shows the smaller one in place. Then I started working on the larger one. It was built the same way. After that, I added some nut bolt washer castings to them, and I rusted them up with an ammo oil brusher. I then added the steps all around the building. Then it was time to work on the lights. They were mounted at a funny angle on the station. I also worked on dirtying up the smokestacks, again using an oil brusher. I had to do a little bit of rusting up of both of these pieces once I was done, and installing the light bulbs in the lights. Once I was done, I went ahead and mounted the lights and the smokestacks onto the buildings. Then came one of my favorite parts, weathering the building using artist pigments. I really like how much control I have over applying these, using a variety of brushes. And of course, after I did one, then I had to do the other one. All that was left was getting these two kits to the two layouts where they're going to be installed. after I take a couple pictures of them on my diorama base. They'll both have the Laurel Bank's bunkhouse alongside them, which will be the next kits that I'm working on. Thank you for watching.